Okay, showcasing these Ludwig 3-ply red sparkle drums I'm selling. 22 by 14, 9 by 13, 16 by 16. This is the railed nuggets on it. Just these two things on here currently. They will not come. I'll just have the covering plates there. Anyway, 9 by 13. This has a Swivomatic on it. Back in the day, factory mounted on a lot of the stuff. Anyway, believe it or not, actually really did happen. And then a 16 by 16 has a Mexico sticker on it that'll come right off. But I mean, it's an orphan together kit. Red sparkle, all same era, 3-ply glue rings. Anyway, but here's something else. Here's a great groove to work on, and this is what I'm saying is, I don't think Bonham's type of playing, for whatever reason, I think in the drumming community, Bonham is sort of viewed because I think a lot of people, there's such a Spinal Tap type over flavor, just in a weird, just at the fringe way when sometimes people think about Zeppelin. Smarter people, maybe not even that musical, who deep down know they appreciate it. But for some reason, Led Zeppelin, there's a weird sort of, well, whether they think it's just druggy glam metal or whatever, like some just way they think about it. If you really listen to Zeppelin, part of the thing which is so great about it is when they're playing well together with each other, okay? And that is very true. Any band or any group that plays well with I know it's true though. Everybody really has the same great sense of time. You always hear it in super professional recordings. But people who, not just the drummer, but everybody has a true sense, a good sense of time. That you sort of like, you actually sort of have a not really a conversation with, but you know, sometimes when you play with somebody who really plays, maybe not with the best time, or that plays a little ahead or a little behind relative to you. I play ahead. I mean, I have time problems that I have to consistently work on. My point is that is my nature. Slight rushing, especially off the film. But, Moxie, for the love of God, really. But this is important, so I'm not going to stop this. She's fine. If I play, I figured this out. If I play with guys or musicians that we play very well together, okay? I mean, we do. If they have great senses of time, they don't necessarily play ahead of the time, kind of like I do, or rush, but have good senses of time. They sort of, in that relationship then, even if I play a little ahead, it'll sound tight. Because on my end, I will be very conscious of their time, so I try to really, like, I'll work extra hard and not fucking stuff up. Sometimes what I end up doing there is actually dragging. But check this out, though. But in a group, if I was going to record stuff, I got with two, a bass player and a guitar player. We played tight together. And after a while, we played for a while. Everyone will start kind of fitting in, just kind of time-wise, and their sense of time into the same sort of, like everyone gets so used to each other as players. And I think back to the Bonham thing. Because Bonham, sometimes in that band, Led Zeppelin, which sometimes has that tappy thing for some people, or just, oh, it's glam metal, or even now, sometimes I think even the thought to a lot of people of tribute bands even gives it sort of like a weird sort of something, It just does to a lot of people. Not me, but a lot of people. But if you kind of really listen to sort of how, with Bonham and Zeppelin, they had a great way of playing together live. God knows when you heard them play sometimes live. I mean, live, it was great. But my point is, I think Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones, but Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones were experts at knowing, in recordings, that even if the drummer, remember, drums are a discrete note. Okay? If somebody's playing a guitar, a continuous, if that speeds up or slows down, sometimes even in shorter points, okay? Not the whole tempo changes, but there might be one rush note or one drag note. On a melodic instrument, it flows through. You don't really notice it, okay? If you had a drummer playing to a click track of a beat, and then a guitar player and a bass player and a band, and the singer, and they were all kind of just got in, they were decent players who click, and they just played along to it. If you rewound each one and listened to it back individually, this is going somewhere, it'll really kind of sound, oh, that sounds good. Most people are like, it sounds good. It doesn't sound like it moves. The other one, oh, that doesn't sound like it moves. That one doesn't either. Because all the people are sort of, they're not all necessarily like on the time. They're kind of moving around it a little, okay? But in and of each one of those, it sounds, short of a few statistical mistakes somebody just might make, but you won't really notice a time change in the feel. For example, here's a good thing too. They added drums to Sound of Silence, or Sounds, is it Sound or Sounds of Silence? Those drums on that recording came later. And I hear, to me, for years, like, oh, those drums are kind of sloppy. But what the thing is, even though I think the drums were put over that track slightly sloppier than they could have been, I think, Simon and Garfunkel, they pick up the tempo of that. And when you don't hear any drums there in the first place, anything dictating a discrete time, it doesn't seem like anything until suddenly here comes the studio drummer that has to now put discrete time to it, okay? So the point I'm getting at, back as it relates to Zeppelin and Bonham, that Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones were geniuses when it came to making sure, how else better will you make a recording sound solid if there's a pre-existing discrete note click track. Remember, not like nowadays they use metronomes as click tracks, like, oh, the grid that's going along. But originally the drummer set the grid. So if there are one or two little times in the recording, or three or four, that the drummer, i.e. Bonham, may or may not have meant for straight up crazy emotional effect. A lot of us total diehards would say, oh, Terry, you heretic, of course that's what happened. But what I'm saying is probably not. I mean, yes, most of the time, but there's a lot of really big things like, oh, God, how Zeppelin can you get? That I think simply exist because Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones, when you perfectly tailor the playing to discrete notes, when they move a little bit, especially on the dragging end, in Since I've Been Loving You, there's that point where right before it goes, right there, where it's like this. And it's like, I mean, it's not that late, but my point is just listen to that. There's a big drag there that sounds so cool and so fat because John Paul Jones and Jimmy Page land with Bonham on that downbeat. Maybe they did it when they recorded it just like that, but I'd say odds are when Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones redid the bit rhythm bed and nailed it. Here we go. You know what I'm talking about. Now, it could have been played that way, and there's definitely times live I've heard Bonham, I think, was that talented. But what I'm saying is they might not have necessarily even at worst, waited around. Like, okay, well, you know, he's the greatest drummer in the world just till he does something brilliant. What I'm saying is I think sometimes if Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones, i.e. your rhythm section, locks on to a drummer who has a nice fat-ass sense of time, even in little parts that otherwise might have seemed like mistakes, it's gonna fucking sound cool. And Bonham will be the guy usually to get the credit for that. And this is true, okay? Anyway. This is what, well, that's what I believe. Remember, we're talking 99.2% of perfect, or 98 point, you know, when you have that slight imperfection, I think it gives human beings, like, you know when it's kind of perfect. I think there's the reason why that's why in certain mathematical things approach but never touch. Because I think that's sort of like a relation, I know this sounds crazy, but I'm totally serious, that you can't quite put your finger on it. But I mean, if you really put click tracks and stuff to musicians, you'd be like, oh my God, they're way off. But what it is there is a threshold at what our brain considers to be way off. Some people are better and some people are worse, and everybody perceives time in a different way. Like when we hear hand claps. Boom. 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 Well, you know what that first is? That's people who almost always, statistically, the way they kind of feel time, maybe the way they are, how type B or type A, they start clapping a little earlier. And then some clap later. So, okay, that's why you get that. There might be different people sometimes might clap later and clap, but maybe a shitty time and they're clapping anywhere. But by and large, statistically, it kind of shows you how where people feel way ahead of the time, on top. See, that's the thing too. On top, I will call on top of the time. We'll just forget on top. Ahead or behind, right? I'll call right on is when somebody can play to a click track and you do not hear the click track. That is right on. Okay? In the feel of music, if somebody were to play slightly ahead of that every time, that would be ahead of. Okay, if somebody kind of their center of beat was slightly after that, like there was one of those people that was on the, instead of boom, but are on the other end, that would be Bonham, in my opinion. And I think Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones either played like that or are such good musicians they knew exactly how to play to that. I mean, there's really, really good musicians out there. Bonham was a great, I think, a genius musician. But what I'm saying, for different things, I mean, for the cool sounding stuff you hear on records, but also sort of the simplicity of stuff he'd do, but play almost out of the bar, like it was. Again, like anything, it was kind of bizarrely simple, but sounded so freaking cool when he did it. Part of that was the tuning of his drums and how they played time. But even if he was like farting around, like in a solo that might sound bad on a bootleg, you'd hear him like a regular drummer, like you'd judge Buddy Rich or like Tony Williams. I'm trying to think like the Styles, or like, you know, for what Bonham did. Bonham really actually had skills. I mean, he really did. It's often glossed over, but he did. Die-hard jazz guys know that. There's a certain amount of jazz musicians that I think don't like Bonham, probably because they can't play. They don't, like, maybe they really do think it's shit, right? Because they're so used to like crazy, like Michael Clarke, Tony Williams, like just over the top, great playing, but just only on a technical aspect, okay? Only on a technical aspect. That sometimes that's maybe why they don't appreciate like Elvin Jones. Okay, well, you know, I mean, he's kind of, you know, you know what I'm saying? Like, you get some of that sometimes, I think. But especially with Bonham, too. Now, when you heard and listen, or you're watching live recordings of Bonham soloing, he's brilliant. I mean, as drummers and not, you're like, wow, that guy can really play, but, like, do cool stuff. And in bootlegs that you know are unaltered, like on YouTube and stuff, where, like, you're like, holy shit, listen to what that guy just fucking did. Like the intro to, here's a classic example of this, which is the intro to The Song Remains the Same, which I think is from 1977. Seattle, maybe, or, I don't know, somewhere. And after that comes, whoops, sorry, after that comes in, listen to Bonham, what he does. And he starts going around. And he goes into that gallop. And he might actually play it different. See how he does that? He gets into it that way. The whole thing crescendos a little bit. And it goes into the... he goes into those fast 30 seconds. Hang on. I can fucking do this. Fucking hard to do. For me it is. I could ass around with it, probably get it better. It goes a little longer. My point is, that's a great drummer that does stuff. Even a band you never really heard before did that. Any other drummer, like in the Bee Gees or anything, any real musician would look at it and be like, what the fuck? That was pretty fucking cool. I mean, it's not that it's complex at all, but it's sort of like a marching, real... syncopated, like top heavy, but it fits it so perfectly. Bonham did that naturally. My point is to the recordings, okay? I know this is long and rambling, but it's important. I've always been trying to figure out a way to explain it as full as I can, but in a sense where I think you can really see between, like the way it seems with certain things to other things, okay? And anyway, so here, let's play a groove. This is a quick groove I think is very helpful. And I got that Song Remains the Same groove in my head. Hang on a second. Oh yeah, like it's like a 16th feel. Like. Bonham's playing that, okay? Well, let's not talk about that recording. Well, we probably should. Let's not get into that. Well, anyway, that's the feel. So a 16th, almost like. You hear like if somebody were to play it as straight 16ths on the hi-hats. A real groove guy, even if you got kind of lazy, instead of just like, you really get like I'm intentionally, you can kind of, when a drummer plays behind the beat very well, consistently, i.e. a pocket, that's when all ifs and ands, when everything's all said and done, a drummer with a pocket, well, they always say, well, he plays in the same place all the time, right? No, it's really a drummer that plays a little bit behind the beat. That is what that's what a great drummer can do. I think most of them, I think, were born with it. A lot of them I know were. But I will say this. I have a friend of mine, Ryan, local, who's the king. This kid, well, he's a man now, has a sense of time, which is the Steve Gadd, he plays. He's got the best time I've ever heard on someone I know. Okay? Now, he was kind of born with it, I will say it. But I've watched him hone it. Like, you can tell he's really good because techniques and stuff he picks up, he plays the same way. Knowingly. So he's the full package. But what I'm saying is, with me, I don't play that way. But what I do, I play a slightly on the beat. But if I were to play and like mimic certain Bonham recordings, if I put my musicians to exactly where I'm playing, it will sound fat-ass Bonham-y. Because that's what Zeppelin did. The rhythm section was locked in so tight. Sure, like you can play like drag, but if everybody's like dragging together, not really slowing down, maybe certain little periods of time there actually are slightly, but by and large, playing in a pocket behind the beat like Zeppelin did so well, John Bonham played behind the beat. So like I don't think Bonham had the ability to play behind the beat so innate into him, because there are certain times you will hear on some of the bootleg recordings when they're rehearsing somewhere, you know, at Headley Grange or even earlier stuff, where when you hear him jamming, Bonham does 90% of the time sound like he's behind the beat. But sometimes you will hear him sort of pick it up or rush. And he's a human. I mean, everybody will make mistakes. They're not, but Bonham, they weren't even mistakes. They still sounded cool. But 10% of or a little more than that, often it wasn't always so pockety behind the beat, like locked. Okay? But I can mimic it. I mean, I'll do my best to play at the very least on the beat or slightly behind. I mean, if I could put a click, actually, you know, I should do that. I'll put a click on it. But for me, it's very hard to do the click. My natural tendency is when I hear a click, I want to play on it like I'm going to just hide the noise all the time. And that's, anyway, so let's try. All right, so here's 1, 2, 3. Now this is, dun, 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 dun. So here's a beat that would be right on the click, which wouldn't really sound Zeppelin-y. 3 and a 4 and a. I just played that in my headphones. I 99% of the time did not hear the click. So that's right on. But if I can, but in a relationship with other people in the band, as it does, like if John Paul Jones or Jimmy Page, I don't think they'll necessarily be totally locked on him the whole time and the whole song is behind the beat like Bonham's playing. Part of the tension is that when you do get to, instead of certain like downbeats where they come in together, remember I said if Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones were locked on there, it would sound great. But generally a lot of Zeppelin's tension, there was a certain tension in a certain way sometimes, because the relationship to be where John Paul Jones and Jimmy Page were playing would be, they didn't, consistently, I'd say most of the time, they didn't land perfectly together. but Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones would be, with the added dimension of John Paul Jones's bass note hitting any specific, especially actually like in a weird place, but intentionally in a weird place, in a good place, but where John Paul Jones would, where he'd make sure he was locked in with like a, like one of those. It's something like that, where it'd be very easy to kind of miss that a little bit, but if you make sure John Paul Jones is locked on that, it sounds so cool. The point of what I'm saying is, back to the very beginning, I do think that the way Bonham played, like his style, was very much like his own style. That other drummers, like I know other drummers kind of played that way, and it's definitely within a list of drummers that played that way. But you can almost boil it down to a style, okay? And that's why, how can I explain it? Let's just get on to the exercise. I mean, like, flat out a style. Like, certain drummers, jazz drummers get a lot of respect because it's, hey, man, it's jazz. You know, that style, Tony Williams. But to a lot of players, I think John Bonham doesn't, because there's a lot of players now, I think, are just fascinated with straight-up, like, click-tracky technique that almost instantaneously will discount Bonham's playing at all. It's just totally sloppy and shitty. But from the 98, 99% of perfection, human being-y thing, that's a trillion times better than any snap-it-to-one digital perfection that can ever be achieved. Because digital perfection, it's suddenly like, when everything's totally locked and totally grid and quantized, it's like when you see houses in new subdivisions that are built with like those programs and stuff. Like everything looks so perfect and all together like that. And it's one thing, if you see one thing perfect, that's the thing. If you see one thing perfect, sometimes it looks cool. But if you consistently, I think, see stuff that's 100% perfect all the time, it looks generic. It doesn't look real. After a while, you're like, yeah, but you know, it's something from Target, man. I want to go out and get me one of those shirts they make at this place where they're all handmade, because you really want, you want something that kind of, whether it's you, but just something a little different. That's how human beings are. When you hear something that's 99% perfect, that's as best humans over the years before recording and stuff could ever really play. Consistently lay a song down. We're not machines, right? But so in recent times, though, it started with the click track, to synchronize things or have drummers play to, so they definitely wouldn't rush the ending up or whatever. But you need to play to one well. Now, in those old days, what they do before they quantize everything is they get like the best take in the world out of the drummer playing to the click, and then even comp together as best parts, and then have the rhythm, the bass player and the guitar player play right to that the whole time. It will then sound tight. Okay, even if there's very slight, like slight behinds and slight aheads, it's still so not percent close to perfect time via the metronome, where those little mistakes they're actually making, where like in a total perfectionist, like, fuck, I just missed that bass drum note. When you put the guitar and the bass guitar on it, it sounds like it sounds great, and that's in the 70s what happened. To me, some point in the 80s, I don't know if they did a lot of loops or what, but music definitely changed. Something changed. It still sounds good, but what happens is it makes everything sound alike. I think the dimension of perfect time, people forget how time, they underestimate the importance of time and the way certain musicians play time in recordings. Like when you listen to the Police, you're just used to that style. Stuart Copeland says sort of an upbeat, or when you listen to certain like punk bands, where intention, like so much of the speed or the way the time is handled is part of the emotional landscape. Anyway, here's an exercise, really good Bonham exercise, which I think can help you, kind of with, I think, when Bonham would play, when you'd hear outtakes or really concentrate on him playing a beat, it would be something in the 16th, a feel, but his right hand on the hi-hat and his left hand doing some ghost notes on the snare, like what I was saying before, a whole lot of love. But it's not quite exactly that. But it's here it is. Ah, that's what it is. Sorry, it takes me a minute. Bam, 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 custard pie. That's a great. That is something to practice, to play. Don't even think of it as practice. Just play along kind of with the idea of that groove. you can practice it to a metronome, maybe to make sure you're getting the parts right. But the kind of the beauty of it is sort of relaxing and sort of playing it where it just kind of sounds pretty. While meaning that there's not little awkward like in chess. You don't want to make any stupid mistakes. You can make a big mistake by popping yourself into like one of those 2 or 3 of those question marks, like, and then you lose with checkmate. But you, like when you play a computer on a chessboard, that teaches you not, you know, to avoid short things like little forks and stuff with bishops and stuff. That's a pain in the butt. But my point is, eventually get without the click track or without the computer and play a human being. But in this way, we're not playing with anybody, because you can make stuff up and it will be in music. Everybody has then a great sense. In other words, let's put it this way. A metronome really approximates a human being analog person's sense of perfect time. Okay? I know that sounds crazy, but I will hold true to it. A metronome is as close as you can get. It's like an egg to a pure I mean, not an egg, but like rice and beans. A perfect protein. Eats an egg or some frickin' beef. Okay? You know what I'm saying? 7 chipmunks twirling on a branch. So where I'm going with this is, once you have a good sense of time, relax, and if you just play it by yourself, specifically this groove. Loop that in your head. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. I'm going to close the video with this because I think the camera's going to die.